We have such a polarized group in our community. It's not a community that's whole, which is true of a lot of places and certainly Western culture and many places in the world. But why is that, and why is it so difficult to get things back unified? I have some ideas on that. Hey, there's this Perch. I am, I was thinking about this because I have a couple interviews coming up with some people who I would call not, I don't know, people who have generated a aggressive response. I'll put it that way, in recent days, and I think they're worth listening to because when you think about comics and you think about creators, you think about people who've been in the industry for 10 years, 20 years, sometimes more. Just because some of them don't like the current president doesn't mean we shouldn't, listen to them, hear what they have to say, kind of weigh their argument. But I started thinking that I'm almost dreading, having, almost dreading putting out the interview because it's just going to get, have rocks thrown at it by folks who are just not in the mood to kind of really hear from that particular creator. And I'm not talking about the newer names. I'm talking like somebody who's been in the business for like 20 years. And it just feels like kind of a shame that that's where we are. That there's a kind of this real challenge right now of just even listening to other people's voices. People can't put that stuff on the shelf. I did an interview with Brian Edward Hill that I thought was absolutely amazing. A lot of great stuff to learn in there, and it didn't, it did well. Most people liked it. The vast majority of people liked it. Were happy about it. But then there's a couple people who are like, no, I won't listen to that guy because once upon a time he said he was liberal, so therefore his opinion on everything is invalid and he can go screw himself. And that's just, I mean, it's that's it's just taking away a voice to inform your opinion. I don't get why people are afraid to hear other people's opinions. Like there's almost a fear that if they hear that opinion, they might get swayed. It's like back in the '80s, if you were that old, there was this brief kind of campaign. Campaign's the wrong word, but this kind of the more you know kind of campaign that, hey, if you shake hands with someone who's gay, you're not going to catch the gay. And I remember seeing that in the '80s, thinking, well, what idiot's going to, is this a problem? Who is this? Who is thinking this? And I, sure enough, a decent number of people had that opinion, which was always just baffling to me. I mean, I don't know. It seems very uninformed. I guess I'll put it that way. But um, it's what's interesting to me is I think there's a time for opinion and a time for facts. And I kind of laid it out this way, and I've talked to a couple creators, and I've laid the question out this way, which is, you people can say today, they can make the statement, comics today are not as good as they used to be. Okay, well that's an opinion. It's not a fact. It's going to be individually based. I mean, if a fan went up to a creator and said, comics today are not as good as they were 20 years ago. Well, I mean, the creator might be offended. They might think that was a rude thing to say to them, especially if they were working on comics today, and they might be kind of annoyed by that. But the creator could not say that that was an unfair statement. Might be a dumb statement to make at that particular moment, but it's personal opinion. Everybody's going to have a different opinion. Some people like the '80s, some people like the '90s, some people like the 2000s. Some people like Marvel and hate DC, and some people like Image and not Marvel. And I mean, there's always somebody who's going to like something, and every opinion is a little bit different. So that's an opinion. But then you get to what are the facts? And one of the biggest facts, and I've made now countless videos over it, although it feels like shouting into the wind, and maybe it is the people who say, comics do not sell as well today as they did in the '80s. And that's an interesting one because it's both true, it's factually true, but it's also a misleading statement. And both of those things are very true. Why is it true? Well, because raw numbers of comics that sold out of a publisher and into a store were higher back in the 80s than they are today. That's true. More comics moved back then. But here's where it's misleading. Number one, comics were a lot cheaper in the 80s. Number two, comics were distributed in immensely more places than in the 80s and today. So the overall market was dramatically different. And three, there was this whole thing about newsstand returnability, where comics that didn't sell could be returned. So stores ordered more, and to many stores, it's not like if you were Safeway, you thought about comics, you just thought about kind of stock for your magazine rack, and you just placed a bulk order and stuff came in. That was just how it was done. And that so those factors are very important, because when you're saying, hey, comics don't sell as well today as they sold in the 80s, you're saying that to make, the follow-up statement is not because distribution was much different and the available market for comics was much different, the price point for comics was much different. But that's not the second part of that sentence. The second part of the sentence is usually, which goes to show that comics today suck and nobody likes them. And that again, it takes a factual but misleading statement and it tacks an opinion onto it. And that's the goofy part of the whole thing. So I struggle, because I think it's, if we can't get aligned on the facts, or at least what's a misleading statement and what's not, then it gets very hard to discuss the opinions. And and if you don't have a grounding, I think if you take a lot of college classes, you take or not just college, I mean anywhere, if you're trying to run a project, or you're working in a company, or you're doing any of those things, and you're debating your point, one of the things that people will tell you is you need to establish a platform of common understanding, and from there you make your case, you make your opinion. For those people who are going, college, bunch of liberals, um, I, I think this is a valuable trick if you're working in a place, working, say, or in a job, and you would like a raise. A good way to get a raise, a good, not trick, but technique in order to get a raise and to justify that you deserve more money, is to, with your boss, with your manager, whoever it happens to be, to use that approach. Get the two of you, get yourself and your boss onto a common field of understanding, and then put forth your opinion. Your opinion being that you need more money. Maybe the common approach is, I work hard. Do you agree? And if your manager's like, yeah, you do agree. Okay, so now you're talking from the same place. Now you ask for more money. That's kind of the approach that is, that if I was a job coach, that's what I'd be telling people. It's like, get to that common frame of understanding, then go for money. So it's job tips with Perch. But anyway, that's the problem in comics, is that getting to that common frame of understanding gets really, really difficult when we jump quickly to the opinions without kind of getting aligned on the facts. So the facts are, yes, there were more comics sold in the 80s, but the conditions around that sale were so dramatically different that really even making that statement from a quality perspective is, it's irrelevant. It doesn't add anything. It doesn't bring any real value. And that's why the whole conversation goes sideways very quickly, because the argument starts to become around different understandings of the opinion, as opposed to anything really tangible or meaningful. And so how does this all relate? Well, it's that there's a reluctance to want to get to those facts, because unfortunately what's happened is that the conversation has been going on for so long, so long, so long, and the kind of the lack of wanting to discuss on a factual level has existed for so long that everybody's just salty and upset with each other all the time. The fans are upset because they don't think they're being listened to, and not all the fans, but some of the fans are upset because they don't think they're being listened to. The creators are upset because they feel like the fans are using shoddy logic and don't know anything about the business. And so the creators will say something like, you don't know anything about the business. And then that's translated, of course, of you don't know anything, and on we go. And I think that, I've had conversations with Kurt Busiek, with Ron Mars, with Eric Larson, with a bunch of names like that. You do sense, again, whether you agree with them or not on all the social issues, political things, other things, you sense a weariness in them, especially when it goes to talking about, you know, our comic quality or comic sales or those numbers. You just there's an exhaustion there. And unfortunately, fortunately, unfortunately, these guys, like them or not, have, decades of experience, because like me, they're old. No, no offense. No, I don't mean it that way. But, we've been in the business for a while. And so we've seen this stuff come and go and come and go and come and go. When I remember my first kind of irrational debate, and it was over just, who's better, Marvel or DC, and kind of watching that all play out. And I think that the challenge is, the creators are tired of having this argument. The fans are tired of being ignored. And in both cases, you just have a lot of exhaustion of people not really wanting to hear about it anymore. And then, kind of on top of that, you had some charismatic people on both sides. This isn't one of those there are fine people on both sides moments, but you have some very charismatic people arguing on each end, and they have, muddied the waters, at least to some extent, because they've said things that their followers by and large want to hear. And so some kind of misunderstood or misrepresented facts have come out. And that's really, you see that very, very much the case around numbers, around sales. You see some very, very inaccurate things have been said and been promoted and been pushed out around what sells better when, and who is paid where. And it's always the stuff that is kind of slipped in under the cracks. And in some cases, like on the comic side, it's marketing. It's where, Marvel may say, the creators of this hit selling book, blah blah blah, and other creators will say, see, it's a hit selling book, and the fans will say this thing doesn't sell more than 10,000 copies. And the reality is, it's like, hey, look, this all started because some marketing intern was just trying to cram out a solicitation at like 11 o'clock at night before they got to go home. And so maybe none of this stuff should be taken that seriously, at least that language. And it certainly shouldn't be fought over, because it's a useless argument that doesn't get us anywhere. But it is, how do you get people to listen to folks who have been in the business for a long time and have some facts and some information, some data to kind of impart? But at the same time, in recent days, like Gerry Conway, creator, has a long, long history of a lot of comics being put out, kind of understands the business very well. Certainly dislikes the current administration, like many of the current creators do, which, as I've said in other videos, is should be kind of expected at this point. I mean, the creative industry, by and large, leans left. That's not a crazy, wild guess. It's just kind of how the business works. If I start my video series on kind of the Lockheed Martin and the arms business, I'm gonna I'm gonna pick up a much more right wing. Just that tends to be who how the people who are in the business go. And not 100%, no, not even close to 100%, but there is just that general leaning. Um, and and so you want to get the data out of these people. You want to get, I really want to take, here's something that these folks are willing to impart, and put it into kind of the heads of the fans who are, hungry and anxious for more information, or maybe are running around with the wrong information. And how do they learn? And, you get a guy, I think, like Brian Edward Hill, who was extremely, I mean, just, I wish people realize how much of a gift Brian talking about these things are, because here's a person who does as immense. He's left of center by far, but he doesn't yell and shout about politics. He doesn't tell somebody, hey, you voted for Trump, I'm not going to talk to you. He's just he's able to separate those things out, which is amazing. I think that's the best case scenario of what we want people to be able to do. But it's hard. It's increasingly, and it's getting harder and harder. And I sympathize with fans who just kind of want to know something and feel like they're being talked down upon, especially for their political opinions, or maybe kind of their situation in life. I'm very sympathetic, and I think not nearly enough attention went into really digesting, why, people in the quote unquote flyover states went for Trump, and why they go right, and why they feel this very heavy kind of condescending tone from the left, and there is something there why they do feel this way. And on the other end, I do understand why creators just feel like they've had enough, like they're fed up with being kind of harassed and taken to task by people on Twitter or in videos who, throw out, quote unquote stats that are not true, just have are not based in fact. I get those two sides, and I've been making these videos. I'm continuing to make these videos, and I post on Twitter and all that. But that's where I'm coming from, and it's a minefield. I mean, every day you're gonna post what you post. Very quickly, you just have to come to a conclusion that, at some point, hey, it could all blow up, and you have nobody listening to you, and that's okay. You just got to be okay with that, and because if otherwise you're gonna start to cave to one side or the other, and then everything falls apart. But anyway, it just kind of a dilemma. I wanted to put my thoughts out there for you, see what everybody thought, and I'll put this video out of cycle because it has no real merit. So anyway, I hope everybody's doing well. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notification, tell a friend, on and on and on. Follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch. Thanks for listening.